I caught my fiancée sexting her toxic ex and canceled our wedding. As revenge, I slept with the woman she hated the most and sent her the spicy photos. I'm a 28-year-old guy who thought I had it all figured out. Great job, amazing fiancé, and a picture-perfect future laid out before us. But life has a way of shattering your illusions when you least expect it. This is the story of how I went from planning my dream wedding to canceling it in the blink of an eye and the chaotic aftermath that followed. It all started on a random Tuesday evening. I had gotten home early from work, looking forward to surprising my fiancée with takeout from her favorite Thai place. As I walked through the door, I heard her giggling in the bedroom. Thinking she was on the phone with a friend, I quietly made my way down the hall, excited to see the look on her face when I popped in unexpectedly. But the moment I pushed open the bedroom door, my world came crashing down around me. There she was, sprawled across our bed, phone held above her face as she typed furiously. The giggles I'd heard weren't innocent. They were the kind of breathless laughs that come from flirtatious banter. Before I could say a word, she noticed me and let out a startled yelp, scrambling to hide her phone. "Babe, you're home early," she exclaimed, her voice an octave too high. I stood there frozen, as a sickening realization washed over me. "Who were you texting?" I asked, already dreading the answer. She tried to brush it off, claiming it was just her sister, but I could see the panic in her eyes. When I held out my hand for the phone, she clutched it to her chest like a lifeline. "Come on," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "If it's nothing, you won't mind showing me." For a moment, I thought she might actually hand it over. But then something hardened in her expression, and she shook her head. "I don't have to show you anything," she snapped. What happened to trust? Those words hit me like a slap to the face. Trust? After what I'd just witnessed, I lunged for the phone, and in her surprise, I managed to snatch it from her grasp. What I saw on that screen confirmed my worst fears and then some. It wasn't her sister she'd been texting. It was her ex, the same toxic ex she'd sworn she'd cut out of her life years ago. And these weren't innocent catch-up messages. No, these were full-on sexts, complete with suggestive photos and promises of secret meetups. I felt like I was going to be sick. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage and betrayal. She burst into tears, begging me to understand. Apparently, he'd reached out a few months ago, claiming he'd changed and wanted to apologize for how he'd treated her in the past. One thing led to another, and I couldn't listen to any more of her excuses. I stormed out of the room, her pleas falling on deaf ears. As I paced our living room, my mind raced through every moment of the past few months, searching for signs I might have missed. How could I have been so blind? The next few days were a blur of arguments, tears, and sleepless nights. She swore it was just a momentary lapse in judgment, that she'd never actually met up with him. But the damage was done. Every time I looked at her, all I could see were those messages, taunting me. After a week of agonizing back and forth, I made the hardest decision of my life. I called off the wedding. The fallout was brutal. Our families were shocked, our friends took sides, and suddenly the future I'd been so sure of crumbled to dust. I moved out of our shared apartment, crashing on a buddy's couch while I tried to piece my life back together. But as the initial shock wore off, a new emotion began to take hold. Anger. White-hot, all-consuming anger. Not just at my ex-fiancée, but at myself for being so easily fooled. I wanted her to feel the same pain, the same humiliation she'd inflicted on me. That's when I hatched my plan for revenge. There was one woman my ex had always been insanely jealous of, her high school nemesis who'd gone on to become a successful model. Let's call her M. My ex would seethe every time M posted a new glamour shot on social media, making snide comments about how fake she was. I knew it was petty, but in my hurt and anger, I didn't care. I slid into M's DMs, explaining who I was and what had happened. To my surprise, she was incredibly sympathetic. We started chatting regularly, and before long, the conversation took a flirtatious turn. One night, after too many drinks and a particularly bitter argument with my ex over the phone, I invited M over. What happened next was a whirlwind of passion and terrible decision-making. We took photos, lots of photos, each one more provocative than the last. In the cold light of morning, I knew I should feel guilty. but all I felt was a twisted sense of satisfaction. Without giving myself time to second guess, I compiled the photos into a message and hit send. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone blew up with notifications. Calls, texts, voicemails, all from my ex. I ignored them all, riding high on a wave of vindictive pleasure. But as the day wore on, that feeling began to sour. What had I really accomplished? I'd stooped to her level, betraying my own values in the process. The satisfaction of revenge gave way to a gnawing sense of shame. I finally answered one of her calls, bracing myself for the tirade I knew was coming. But instead of anger, all I heard was quiet sobbing. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice raw with hurt. With her of all people? In that moment, the full weight of what I'd done came crashing down on me. Yes, she had betrayed me first. But my actions weren't about justice or evening the score. They were about inflicting pain, pure and simple. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling wholly inadequate. "I was hurt and angry, and I wanted you to feel the same way. But that doesn't make it right." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I guess we're even now, huh?" The bitterness in her voice was palpable. "No," I replied, surprising myself with the realization. "We're not even. We're both just broken." That conversation marked a turning point. The anger that had been fueling me for weeks finally began to dissipate, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. I realized that continuing down this path of mutual destruction would only leave us both in ruins. Over the next few months, we began the painful process of untangling our lives. There were moments of backsliding, heated arguments where old hurts were dredged up, moments of weakness where we fell into bed together, desperately trying to recapture what we'd lost. But slowly, painfully, we began to heal. I won't lie and say it was easy. There were days when the loneliness felt suffocating, when I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text her about some inside joke, only to remember that those moments were gone forever. I struggled with trust issues, questioning every interaction in my new attempts at dating. But as time passed, I began to see our relationship and its demise with clearer eyes. We had both made terrible mistakes, letting our insecurities and impulses override our better judgment. The foundation of trust we thought we had built was far shakier than either of us had realized. 1 year to the day after I'd called off our wedding, I ran into my ex at a mutual friend's birthday party. The awkwardness was palpable at first, but as the night wore on, we found ourselves able to talk without the weight of resentment hanging over us. "I'm sorry," she said as we stood in a quiet corner, nursing our drinks. "For everything. The sexting, the lies. I was scared of commitment, and instead of being honest about it, I self-sabotaged in the worst way possible." I nodded, feeling a knot in my chest loosen slightly. "I'm sorry too," I replied. What I did in response was cruel and immature. We both screwed up. She gave me a sad smile. "Do you think, in another life, we could have made it work?" I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. "I don't think so," I said gently. "We brought out some of the worst in each other, but I hope we can both learn from this and do better in the future." As I watched her walk away, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't even realized I'd been missing. The anger, the hurt, the desire for revenge. It all seemed so pointless now. We had both made mistakes, some worse than others, but dwelling on them wouldn't change the past. In the end, I learned some hard lessons about trust, communication, and the dangers of letting your emotions override your moral compass. I'm not proud of how I handled things, but I can say that I've grown from the experience. These days, I'm taking things slow, focusing on myself and building genuine connections with people. I've learned to be more open about my feelings, to address issues head-on instead of letting them fester. And most importantly, I've learned that true healing comes not from revenge, but from forgiveness, both for others and for yourself. If there's one thing I could say to anyone going through a similar situation, it's this. Don't let the hurt turn you into someone you're not. The satisfaction of revenge is fleeting, but the consequences can last a lifetime. Choose healing, choose growth, and choose to be the better person, even when it's the hardest thing in the world to do. And hey, if you've made it this far in my story of love, betrayal, and questionable life choices, why not hit that subscribe button? Trust me, it's way less complicated than navigating the minefield of modern relationships.